Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series on Aristotle's Poetics. In this video we're going to be looking at what is catharsis. Now, Aristotle defends tragedy in the face of Plato's criticism by claiming that it can allow us to properly experience and therefore purge our emotions of fear and pity. While Plato was concerned that the theater would lead people to draw irrational conclusions, Aristotle saw it as a place for them to properly experience these emotions without doing any real harm. Aristotle called this purgation of emotions the catharsis. Now, for Aristotle, a tragedy should move us to fear and pity with the resolution of the play, which will allow us to purge ourselves of these emotions, to remember it was all a story. Aristotle was a critic of pieces that aroused emotions through solely spectacular means, through stunts, special effects, etc., as opposed to the actions of characters towards each other. And there are many literary critics today who have empathy for this. Now, specifically, Aristotle thought these emotions should arise through those with close relationships doing harm to each other. Our modern notions broadly have a wider range of reasons that we might experience fear or pity for the character, but for Aristotle, this was the central, best way to have it. It should arise from the interactions between people. The most interesting interactions are those between people that know each other and care for each other, particularly when those that know and care for each other hurt each other. It's expected for those who are indifferent to each other or hate each other to do each other harm. However, it's frightening to imagine that those closest to you might do you harm, and incites pity to see someone realize that they have done harm to those they hold the most dear. Aristotle broadly is talking about people that are killing their loved ones, Medea, Oedipus, these kinds of things. However, this conception of doing harm to those closest to you has been reconceptualized in modern theater, not necessarily to always mean killing, but could mean to psychological harm and these kinds of other things of knowingly or unknowingly the hurt that you cause the people you care the most about is sometimes the most dramatically powerful and interesting. So some elements of this, at least, still are present in our conceptions of theater. Now, Aristotle outlines 4 different ways this can be done, along 2 different axes, knowingly and unknowingly, and completed or started but stopped at the last minute. He goes on to rank these methods from best to worst. Once again, as Aristotle does, trying to both document what happens in theater, but also give his opinion on what should be done in theater. So, we have knowingly and unknowingly, we have completed and stopped. So, an action that is done knowingly and stopped is the worst, in his opinion. It's basically an idle threat. There's no fear that's arisen in the audience that this might actually happen. Someone basically that says, I'm going to kill you, and then doesn't. We don't care as much about that. There's no real fear or pity. We don't think that it's actually going to happen, and it's stopped, so we're like, it's fine. The next you have completed knowingly. The second worst, the deed is done with full knowledge of what is being done. There's none of that kind of recognition that we talked about in the last video, but there's the knowledge of someone that in a fit of pure hatred or a fit of passion goes and kills someone they care about or does harm to someone they care about in an important way, knowing that they're doing it. To Aristotle, this isn't as interesting because it doesn't have that kind of moment of recognition, that moment perhaps of the audience knows more than the characters do, and the audience sees, oh God, they're doing something that you know not what you do, kind of thing. For Aristotle, the second best is a deed is done, but then it's later realized to have been wrong. So when a character goes and does something horrible to someone they care about, and then maybe they realize that that person was someone they care about, maybe they realize what the deed was that they actually did, it arises that fear and pity in us because we feel both the fear for the person that it's being done to of, oh God, I could be that person, I could be that one who someone that loved me did something harmful to me, but also the pity for the person who doesn't know what's going to happen because you feel more of that empathy than the thing done knowingly because you feel, I could accidentally hurt someone that I know or that I love. And finally, for Aristotle, the best is a situation where it's stopped and it's done unknowingly, where the realization where you're about to cause harm to someone and in the middle of the act you realize And that recognition occurs right there. You realize that this is your child, or that this is your father, or whatever it is. And it causes the perpetrator to stop. This is really interesting for Aristotle because it means that both of those characters continue to be around with the full knowledge of either what they were about to do or what was almost done to them. And it has a little bit of that moralistic sense of turning things on its head and saying, this is what you should do with an action, and you should act knowingly, not unknowingly, kind of thing. But it still arises that fear and pity within us of, oh, this might happen, it might happen. And it gives us still that building of fear and pity of, oh, we haven't resolved anything. I haven't gotten that release yet. So the catharsis is the release, though. The catharsis then comes from the purgation of the emotions of fear and pity for the characters, seeing the horrible acts done or almost done, and being comforted with the thought that this is just a performance. While the ways that are used to incite fear and pity in today's storytelling certainly do not conform to Aristotle's kind of rigid hierarchy, the general sentiment that we get a release from the resolution of a story is widely felt. Additionally, there is a sentiment that stories that incite fear through cheap jump scares are worse than those that do it through a deep examination of kind of human nature. Once again, an idea that can be traced back to Aristotle. While catharsis still holds much sway in kind of modern ideas of drama, it's unclear whether it's a necessary element. Some stories, such as those that mean to incite action about a cause, are left with an ask of the audience instead of the feeling that they should do something. Instead of a feeling that they should do so. So basically, agitprop theater, agitation and propaganda theater, doesn't give you a nice catharsis at the end. It says, this is really happening, go do something. It says, no, you don't get that release. That fear, that pity that you feel for these characters, that's actually happening somewhere in the world. Go take action. Bertolt Brecht famously argued against the cathartic model of theater as merely serving the purpose of keeping the masses calm. For Aristotle, this was a virtue, not a vice. But for Brecht, the theater should inspire the audience to take action to resolve the injustice of the world, taking the opposite view to Plato, that Plato's saying that you shouldn't base your decisions in these things based on the theater, you should base them on philosophy and rational thought and argument and the study of the truth. Whereas for Brecht, the theater was a tool to convince people to rise up and take that action that needed to be taken throughout the world. There are interesting arguments that go back and forth here of saying, is the theater an effective way of doing this? As much as Bertolt Brecht was effective at creating a fascinating and interesting aesthetic to the theater, many of his plays did not serve their purpose of actually inciting people to action. And there's a case for such shows as comedy shows that serve as agitation propaganda in political spheres because they give us that comedic release and that catharsis don't actually serve their purpose, for Brecht's reasons, of convincing us to do something about the issue because they give us a relax and a catharsis beyond just the ask. So there are some very interesting, still live conversations happening about catharsis, its purpose in theater, whether theater's purpose is solely to entertain or to convince people to take action, and whether it should be, and whether you should be listening to actors or philosophers about what you should do. Next up, and the final video in the series, we will be taking a look at what is Deus ex machina, a trope identified originally by Aristotle that still exists today, though in very interestingly different forms. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.